What would you do if a flight attendant slapped you while you were holding your sick baby just for asking for warm water? Would you scream, fight back, or stay silent and let the truth speak for itself? One mother didn't raise her voice, but she shook an entire airline to its core. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The rain in Seattle had that kind of chill that crept into your sleeves and settled in your spine. Mayla tightened the blanket around her son as she stepped through security, one slow, steady breath at a time. Her boots clicked softly against the tile floor. TSA had been polite enough until they scanned her boarding pass. Their eyes flicked from her faded hoodie to the words "First Class, Aurelia Skies." "Ma'am," one of them said, slower now, like he was trying to figure out if she was lost. She just nodded. "I know where I'm going." The man handed back her ID with a clipped smile. It was the kind of smile that asked a question without saying it. Mayla had seen it too many times to count. Inside the gate, she rocked her son gently. 3 months old and already fighting a cold. His little chest wheezed now and then, nothing urgent, but enough to knot her stomach with worry. She checked his temperature again, 99.6. Close, but not dangerous. Still, the flight was 5 hours. Anything could happen in 5 hours. Mayla used to design homes for a living. Now her world was narrowed down to burp cloths, bottle warmers, and the way her son's face crinkled right before he started to cry. After her mother passed, a delay in triage, that's all the hospital said. Mayla had sworn she'd never let anyone delay her child's needs. Not even by a second. She adjusted the carrier strap across her chest, kissed the baby's forehead, and boarded. First class smelled like leather and lemon. The kind of place people looked up from newspapers, then looked through you. She was halfway to her seat when she caught the glance from the flight attendant. Blonde, bun-tight as a drum. Badge reading, Renee H. The woman's eyes dropped to the baby, then back to Mayla's tired face. "Can I help you find your seat?" she asked, though her tone made it sound like Mayla might be in the wrong cabin. "No, thank you," Mayla replied. "I've got it." She didn't expect a red carpet. She just didn't want to feel like she had dirt on her shoes. Renee gave a stiff nod and moved on. A moment later, she returned with a tray of drinks for the other passengers, rattling off the standard greetings, smiles for the suit and tie crowd, brief pauses to adjust a lapel or offer sparkling water. When she reached Mayla, she didn't make eye contact. "Any requests?" she asked, eyes on the tray. "Just water for now," Mayla said, adjusting her son's blanket. "Warm, if that's possible." Renee blinked, then said flatly, "We don't usually serve custom temperatures." She moved on before Mayla could respond. At first, Mayla thought she'd misheard. Maybe she was just being sensitive. The baby whimpered again, soft and dry in his throat. She leaned forward and pressed the call button. When Renee returned, her hands were on her hips. "I'm sorry," Mayla said calmly. "He's having trouble swallowing. If there's any way you could bring just a bit of warm water, it'd really help." Renee sighed. "You should have brought what you needed. We're not your kitchen." Silence. That thick kind of silence that hums under your ribs. A man too rose up, turned in his seat, his brow raised like he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. The woman across the aisle lowered her magazine. Mayla didn't flinch. She looked down at her son, whose lips were starting to chap from breathing through his mouth. Her hand cupped the side of his face. She whispered something only he could hear. Then she looked up. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. But something in her gaze shifted, like glass turning into stone. She locked eyes with Renee, and for a second, neither of them moved. She didn't need to say a word. She didn't raise her voice. But the whole cabin went silent. Mayla sat back in her seat, her arms wrapped around her baby like a second skin. The low hum of the plane engine filled the silence that had followed Renee's last remark. People had turned away, turned back to their tablets or books, but the echo of those words still clung to the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. She rocked gently, not in rhythm, just enough to keep her son calm. His breathing had steadied, but she could feel his chest fluttering against hers. His fingers curled in her shirt, as if even in sleep, he knew she needed anchoring. Her eyes burned, But she didn't cry. She never cried in front of strangers. Growing up, her mother had called tears a luxury for safer rooms. And this plane? This cabin, where she felt more like a trespasser than a paying passenger? It was anything but safe. She adjusted her seatbelt, breathing in slow. Out slower. Was it her fault? Should she have brought a thermos? Should she have spoken up louder? Or said nothing at all? No. She did what any mother would do. What any human would do. Ask for a little warmth for a baby. Her fingers pressed gently against her son's back, feeling his heartbeat. That was the only thing that mattered right now, keeping him calm, keeping him healthy. She glanced at the seat beside her empty. Elias had offered to fly separately, said he'd handle the setup in Atlanta ahead of time. He always thought ahead. Before the flight, he'd cupped her face in both hands and said, "If anything happens, don't confront. Just tell me." Okay. At the time, she thought he meant delays. Lost luggage. Flight issues. Not this. Her lips tightened. The woman across the aisle, a prim, older lady with pearls and pressed slacks, had been watching since boarding. Now, she looked over, gave a tight smile. Not kind. Not cruel. Just tired. Like she wanted to say something, but couldn't risk the discomfort. Mela held her gaze a moment too long. The woman looked down at her lap, folded and unfolded her napkin. 2 rows ahead, a boy, maybe 12, leaned over and whispered to his mom, just loud enough for Mela to catch it. Why did the lady talk mean to her? His mother shushed him and offered him an iPad. Mela closed her eyes. The baby stirred against her chest. She needed to breathe, but the air felt thinner here. Pressurized. Yes, but there was a different kind of weight pressing down. The kind that doesn't come from altitude. She reached into her bag, found her phone by feel, and opened the secure messaging app Elias had installed for work. She'd never used it. Didn't think she'd ever need to. She typed slowly, one thumb at a time, shielding the screen with her blanket. Something happened. Will explain when I land. That was all. No emotion, no details. Just a signal. She hit send. Renee passed by again, checking Rose with an air of mechanical indifference. She didn't even glance Mela's way this time. Like she'd dismissed her completely now that she'd handled the disturbance. A man with a salt and pepper beard watched Renee move up the aisle. He looked toward Mela with a tight jaw, but said nothing. Silence had never sounded so loud. Mela looked out the window, where clouds layered thick like cotton torn in frustration. Her thoughts wandered back to Elias again, not the business calls or meetings, but the night they sat on the porch, barefoot, sipping hot tea. When she told him she didn't want to raise their son in a world that smiled with its mouth and judged with its eyes. He hadn't said anything profound. He just pulled her into his arms and said, "Then let's build our own world inside this one. One where he knows his worth." Her hand drifted to her son's soft curls. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's why she sent the message. Because sometimes protecting your child meant more than diapers and lullabies. It meant knowing when to speak, and knowing when to wait. She didn't know how this flight would end. But one thing was clear. Renee hadn't just spoken to her. She'd spoken to every person who ever had to prove they belonged. And Mela? She wasn't going to prove a damn thing. She was just going to show them. Mela didn't say a word when the plastic cup touched her tray. It was clear, no steam rising. Cold. She stared at it for a beat, then looked up at Renee, who gave a practiced, dismissive nod before moving on without pause. Her son stirred lightly in the carrier, letting out a low cough that sounded dry and tired, like something scratching its way out of his throat. Mela adjusted the strap, murmured softly to soothe him, and reached for the cup. She touched it, cool to the skin. Not even lukewarm. She looked across the aisle. 2 rows ahead, Renee was pouring hot water from the same silver thermos into a porcelain mug for an older white woman wrapped in a cashmere shawl. The contrast stung sharper than the cold air creeping from the overhead vents. Mela waited. She didn't want to make a scene. She told herself that over and over. This isn't the moment. This isn't the place. But something in her chest began to stretch. Not anger, exactly. Something slower. More exacting. like a weight shifting inside her. "Excuse me," she said, voice calm. "Could I possibly get warm water? This one's cold, and it's for my baby." Renee turned, one brow raised. "Maybe the system's heating unevenly today," she said, offering a tight smile with no kindness behind it. Then she turned back toward the beverage cart. "I saw what happened." A man's voice cut in. Deep, steady. He was seated in the row just behind Mela, a man in his late 50s, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, a weathered novel on his lap. "That wasn't right," he added. "She clearly asked for warm water." Renee didn't slow down. "Sir, please mind your own travel experience," she said, without even looking at him. Mela turned slightly, meeting the man's eyes. He gave her a small nod, like someone who'd seen enough of the world to recognize patterns. Someone who'd maybe spoken too late too many times before. The air in the cabin felt heavier now. Not thick, but tight. Like the pressure inside the fuselage was climbing, just enough to make you question your own breathing. Mela leaned back and looked around, not just at Renee, but at everything. At the way the cabin crew walked past her without eye contact. At the way passengers glanced, then quickly turned away. At the buzz of whispered conversation 2 rows behind her. And for the first time since boarding, she didn't feel invisible. She felt watched. Not with curiosity, but with calculation. The kind that weighs you, measures how you'll react, waits for you to stumble. Her eyes narrowed, but not in anger. In understanding. Maybe this isn't just about me anymore. Her baby let out another small cough, his head twitching gently against her collarbone. She adjusted his position, whispering to him through her teeth. "You're okay, love. Mama's got you." Then came the smallest interruption in the tension, a soft tap on her elbow. Mela turned. It was a little girl, maybe 6 years old, with a messy braid and big round glasses. She stood in the aisle, holding out a sealed packet of warm, moist towels. The kind you get before a meal in first class. The girl's voice was almost a whisper. "My mommy said you could have this." Behind her, the girl's mother, blonde, mid-30s, looked hesitant but nodded. "We had extras," she said, her voice low. "And kids teach us more than we teach them, don't they?" Mela stared at the packet, at the child's outstretched hand, and for a brief second, her heart softened. She took the warm towel, gently. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter than before, but steadier too. She unwrapped the towel, tested the heat on her wrist, and laid it against her baby's chest. His breathing eased, his body relaxing into hers. The warmth did what cold water couldn't, it comforted. The girl smiled and went back to her seat without another word. Mela looked out at the cabin again. Something had shifted. Not dramatically, but just enough. She was done making herself small. Whatever was coming, she wasn't going to avoid it. She was going to meet it head on, with her son pressed against her heart and her eyes wide open. Mela had just gotten her son calm again, his breathing shallow but steady, his small hand resting against her chest like an anchor, when the bottle slipped from her fingers. She hadn't dropped it. Not carelessly. Not out of clumsiness or fatigue. It happened in the blink of an eye. Renee swept past her seat like a gust of wind, clipped and brisk. Her hip brushed against Mela's elbow, and that slight bump was all it took. The bottle flew forward and spun once midair before landing upside down on her lap. Milk gushed out instantly, soaking through her jeans and splashing across her baby's front. The boy let out a sharp, startled cry. Not from pain, just from the shock of cold. His little fingers clenched reflexively, grabbing at her collarbone. Mela's entire body froze. She looked down. A wide, wet stain had spread across her thighs. Her baby's onesie, clean just seconds ago, was now dripping. Tiny splashes dotted the seatbelt, the blanket, even the corner of the diaper bag. The familiar, sour smell of formula rose up in waves. Before Mela could react, Renee turned, arms still crossed as she walked backward, like it wasn't even worth facing. "You shouldn't put things where they're in the way," she said flatly. Her voice clipped like she was checking an item off a list. No apology. No effort to help. Not even a pause. She moved on like nothing happened. Mela blinked, stunned. For a second, she couldn't process it. She wasn't expecting kindness anymore, but basic decency? At least acknowledgement? Across the aisle, a woman in her 40s glanced up from her tablet. Her eyes flicked from Mela's lap to Renee's back, then quickly dropped to her screen. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her, like she was shielding herself from responsibility. Mela took a deep breath, slow and steady. Her hands were sticky now, her jeans damp and clinging. She reached for a burp cloth from the seat pocket, dabbing gently at her son's chest. The milk had started to dry in uneven streaks across his onesie. His cheeks were red from the sudden shock. He whimpered again. A soft, tired sound. She didn't look at Renee. Not yet. Not while her hands were still shaking. Then something shifted, not in her, but around her. Across the aisle, a woman with auburn hair tied into a low ponytail lowered her phone under her tray table. She shifted a folded sweater just enough to reveal a slim camera lens. Her movements were deliberate, focused. She was recording. Mela noticed, and didn't say a word. The air inside the cabin had changed again. It wasn't turbulent, but heavy, dense with the kind of discomfort that settles in the lungs and won't let you breathe easy. People knew something had happened. They saw it, heard it, felt it. But silence, polite, safe silence, still ruled the space. A throat cleared somewhere behind her, hesitant. No words followed. Renee kept moving, still acting as though she hadn't done anything wrong. Still pretending Mela and her child didn't exist beyond inconvenience. No one stopped her. Mela's jaw locked. She rocked her son gently, letting the rhythm soothe him more than the cloth could. He clung tighter, but didn't cry. He just held on, quiet, like her. She tucked the burp cloth across her shoulder, then reached for her phone. This time, she didn't open the encrypted app Elias had installed. This time, she opened the voice recorder. Because if no one was going to speak up for them, the sound would have to. She slid in one earbud, hit record, and then she waited. She didn't have to wait long. Footsteps echoed past. A clatter of trays, the clink of ice in a glass. Then Renee's voice, clear as a bell, speaking to a passenger in that same bitter tone. Some people think just because they bought a fancy seat, they're entitled to everything. The passenger didn't respond. Just a quiet cough. The kind people use when they want to say something but decide it's safer not to. Mela stared out the window. Clouds rolled by like sheets of cotton, thick and endless. She didn't blink. Her fingers didn't waver. 90 seconds. That's all it took. The clip ended with her son's faint, tired cry. A small, wheezy whimper that barely carried. But it was enough. She stopped the recording, named the file, and sent it. Not to a journalist. Not to a stranger. Not to the woman filming across the aisle. She sent it to Elias. No caption. No message. Just the file. Because this wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't a plea. It was a signal. There was something different in the air. Not just a pressure, though it felt like the cabin had grown tighter, like the walls had leaned in an inch closer since takeoff. It was in the way people shifted in their seats, the way conversations had gone quiet. Every movement sounded sharper. Every click of a tray, every cough, every tap of a shoe felt louder in Mela's ears. Her baby stirred against her chest, drawing a soft wheeze through his nose. He wasn't crying, just shifting, restless. She kissed his forehead, still warm, still struggling. The congestion was worse than it had been that morning. She could feel it in his breathing, hear it in the shallow rhythm that pulsed against her collarbone. She adjusted his blanket, smoothing it out with one hand while the other braced against the armrest. Her legs were stiff, her jeans still damp from earlier, and her body begged for rest. But her mind stayed alert, coiled, watching. Then came the footsteps again, the tap-tap-tap of heels with purpose. Renee strode by like she had something urgent to do, but paused just long enough by Mela's row. Not to offer assistance, not to check on the infant, just to deliver her next blow, quiet but perfectly aimed. I've had enough. You're disturbing everyone. The words sliced through the hush of the cabin like broken glass. Mela didn't react right away. She sat still, both hands on the armrest now, her spine tall and rigid, her lips parted, not in response, but from shock. Not because she hadn't expected it, but because it still stunned her how easily cruelty could be served as professionalism. Several heads turned. 2 rows up, an older white woman twisted in her seat. She looked from Mela to Renee, her brows drawn together in disbelief. "She's just holding her child," the woman said, her voice thin but steady. A single sentence, tossed into the tension like a pebble into still water. Renee turned, eyes sweeping across the cabin, searching for support. No one backed her. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Most stayed quiet. That's when Kara stepped forward. She moved slowly, carefully. Barely older than a college graduate, ponytail neat, badge polished. She kept her voice respectful, but there was something in her tone, a note of concern. "Ma'am," Kara said, glancing between Renee and Mela. "I can take over this section if that would help." Renee's face hardened instantly. Her shoulders squared. "Are you questioning my lead right now?" Kara's lips parted, but no words came. Her cheeks flushed, and she took a step back, folding her hands behind her. "No, ma'am," she said softly. "Just offering help." "Then sit down," Renee barked. Silence followed, but not the kind that settles. The kind that thickens. Fills the cabin like fog, sinking into every seat, every row. Everyone heard it. Everyone felt it. Mela's fingers curled tight around the armrest. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, no, that had long since burned out, but from something deeper, older. Her mother's voice echoed in the back of her mind. "Don't cause trouble, baby. Just let it go." They had let it go. At the hospital. When her mother sat bleeding in that emergency room for 5 hours. When nurses walked past without a glance. And when Mela, just 21, stood helpless as her mother's hands turned cold. They had let it go until there was nothing left to hold on to. And now here she was, being told again to stay in her place. Her jaw tightened. "If I scream now," she thought, "I'll become what they expect. Angry, loud, unreasonable." But the other side of that thought gnawed at her. "If I stay silent, will they think I accept this?" Her baby shifted again, lips puckering in sleep, releasing a tiny squeak. Mela reached down, brushed his cheek gently. Her hand trembled, not with rage, but with restraint, with the force it took to hold herself together. 1 row across and behind her, a woman in a gray pantsuit unzipped her leather folio and opened a laptop. She moved quietly, efficiently. No eye contact. No dramatic gestures. Just purpose. She slid in wireless earbuds, opened her email, and began typing. Her fingers didn't pause as she crafted the subject line. Escalated racial incident involving crew. Possible PR/legal risk. Recording available. She hit send. Mela didn't see it, but something in her shifted. The cabin had changed again. The air felt heavier. Yes, but it also hummed with attention. People were watching. Some watched with guilt. Some with quiet sympathy. A few with growing courage. Mela didn't smile. But when Kara looked back at her, eyes filled with apology and shame, Mela didn't look away. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was done being small. Mela had always believed in the quiet kind of strength. The kind that didn't have to shout to be heard. She'd learned early that stillness could carry its own weight, that sometimes silence was more commanding than sound. But this wasn't silence. This was being erased in plain view. Ignored until she no longer existed, just a mother with a fussing baby, taking up space someone else thought she didn't deserve. She'd had enough. Her fingers moved with deliberate calm as she reached for her phone. The act felt simple, almost mundane, but inside, her nerves buzzed like power lines in a storm. She didn't hesitate. She opened the camera app, turned it to record, and placed the phone squarely on her tray table. No hiding. No subtle angle. The lens stared forward, locked in place like a witness. Pointed directly at Renee. The flight attendant was coming down the aisle again, her expression still tight with barely restrained control. When she caught sight of the phone, recording her, she stopped short. Her expression shifted, not to anger, but to something more telling. Uncertainty. You can't film me without permission, she said sharply, but her voice didn't carry the same bite as before. Mayla met her gaze evenly. This is for my son's safety, she replied. I'm not asking for your consent. A ripple moved through the cabin like a breeze through tall grass. A businessman in a navy blazer reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his phone, angling it with care. 2 rows back, a young woman with earbuds tucked behind her ears tilted her screen toward the aisle, thumbing the video icon with slow precision. Renee's face twitched. Her shoulders, always squared and confident, now seemed to slump just slightly. Her eyes darted across the aisle, then to the ceiling, then back to Mayla. I don't appreciate your tone, she said stiffly. This behavior is disruptive to other passengers. Someone across the aisle spoke up. You're making this worse. Step back. The voice was quiet but clear. A man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a quiet authority that didn't need volume to be heard. Renee blinked at him, visibly thrown. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Then, as if the timing had been waiting for this very moment, Mayla felt her son jerk against her chest. His little arms flailed. A strangled sound escaped his lips, half cough, half choke. Sure, baby, Mayla whispered, lifting him gently. You're okay, I've got you. But he wasn't okay. His breathing was no longer shallow. It was erratic, labored. Short gasps layered on top of one another. No rhythm, just struggle. His back arched. His legs stiffened. Then came the cry. Thin, choking, desperate. Panic sliced through Mayla's composure. He's choking, she cried out, her voice cracking. He needs help, he needs air. Kara was already moving, med kit in hand. Her face was pale but focused. I've got it, she called, crouching to get through the narrow aisle. I'm trained, let me help. But Renee moved like a barricade, stepping into her path, arms out. You don't move unless I say so. The cabin inhaled sharply as one. The words rang out like a slap across a sanctuary. People stood up, some instinctively. Others craned their necks, rising in their seats to get a better view. The same man who had spoken earlier took 2 solid steps into the aisle. Back off, he shouted. This baby can't breathe. Renee turned, her face flushed deep red, her jaw working as if searching for the next word. But she was too late. No one was listening anymore. Mayla had already unbuckled, arms shaking as she shifted her son upright. His face had turned splotchy, reddened around the edges, pale at the center. His lips parted, but no sound came. Kara slipped beneath Renee's outstretched arm, like water through a crack. She knelt beside Mayla, eyes locked in. Keep him upright, Kara said quickly. You're doing great. I've got the oxygen. Renee opened her mouth again, but the captain's voice burst through the overhead intercom, calm but undeniable. This is your captain. Flight attendants, please take your positions and assist as necessary. Renee stepped back immediately. Silence fell. Even the baby's gasping seemed to freeze in the moment. Renee's arms dropped. Her heels clicked as she backed toward the galley without another word. Kara placed the oxygen mask over the baby's nose and mouth, adjusting the dial with hands that trembled only slightly. Within seconds, color began to return to his cheeks. The tightness in his chest eased. His limbs loosened, no longer stiff with panic. Mayla held him close, rocking gently, as her shoulders finally slumped forward. A slow, steady breath escaped her lips. And then the tears came, not from fear anymore, not from rage, but from the weight of letting go, from finally knowing she didn't have to carry it all alone. A soft voice came from behind. You did the right thing, ma'am. Mayla didn't look up. She just nodded, eyes locked on her son's breathing. The plane touched down with a thud that made a few passengers jump in their seats. Mayla didn't flinch. She instinctively tightened her arms around her son, feeling the ripple of motion as the wheels hit the runway. The baby stirred but didn't cry. His breathing was steady now, slow and rhythmic, his tiny fists curled beneath his chin. She pressed a palm against his back, just to be sure. All around them, the usual end-of-flight energy, zippers, buckles, people standing too soon, was absent. The cabin remained still. No one moved to grab a bag or reach for a coat. Instead, passengers sat unusually straight, their eyes darting between Mela, Renee, and the cockpit door that remained stubbornly shut. It was as if everyone could feel something was coming. They just didn't know what. Then the captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Ground crew is en route. We'll begin deboarding shortly." His tone was calm, but clipped. Controlled. There was no "thank you for flying with us." No, "we hope you enjoyed your flight." Mela glanced at the seatbelt sign. Still lit. She knew this wasn't standard procedure. Minutes passed. The tension only deepened. And then the cabin door opened with a hiss. 4 figures entered, moving with quiet precision. 2 men in charcoal suits. 1 woman in a navy blazer, the Aurelia Skies badge gleaming under the LED lights. A 4th in an airport security uniform. They didn't pause. Didn't scan the rows. They walked straight to Mela. "Ma'am," said the woman in the blazer, her voice calm but purposeful. "Would you and your child come with us, please?" Mela nodded once. No panic. No resistance. She unfastened her seatbelt, cradled her son against her chest, and grabbed her bag in one smooth motion. The air in the cabin shifted again. Eyes followed her, whispers buzzed low, but no one spoke aloud. From the front, Renee stood near the galley, arms folded, a smirk creeping up the side of her mouth. "I hope she learns her place," she murmured under her breath, just loud enough for the man beside her to hear. But the words barely left her mouth before the scene outside the cabin changed. Because standing just beyond the threshold, waiting, still and certain, was Elias. Not in a designer suit. Not flanked by lawyers or reporters. Just jeans, a gray shirt, and the kind of stillness that didn't ask for attention. It commanded it. Mela's steps slowed. He didn't speak. Just met her eyes, reached out to brush his fingers across their son's cheek, and turned to walk into the cabin. And as soon as Elias crossed the plane's threshold, the entire energy in the room shifted like a tide pulled by gravity. People straightened without realizing. Even Kara, still buckled in the jump seat, sat taller. Behind Elias, the corporate team followed. 1 man carried a folder. Another, a tablet. No one needed to introduce him. Renee already knew. Her face drained of color. Because she had seen him before in onboarding materials, leadership newsletters, the company's 10-year anniversary video. Elias Dorsey, co-founder, executive VP of operations, the man who built Aurelia Skies from nothing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He flipped through the document handed to him, only glancing at the contents. Then he looked at Renee. "Who put their hands on my wife?" The cabin froze. Renee's lips moved, searching for words. None came. No apology. No justification. Just silence. Elias turned to the man holding the tablet. A screen lit up with thumbnails, video recordings, audio files, timestamps, witness reports. He scrolled briefly, nodded once, then folded his arms. "We don't build airlines to insult mothers," he said evenly. His eyes didn't waver. "Terminate her." He paused for 1 beat. "Then, legal will follow up." That was it. 3 sentences. No shouting. No threats. Just a quiet dismantling of power that needed no theatrics. Renee didn't speak again. She stepped aside, shoulders sinking. Kara looked down, blinking fast, her lips trembling in silent relief. Elias turned back to Mela, who hadn't taken her eyes off their son. He placed a steady hand on her back. "Let's go home," he said gently. And together, without another word, they walked off the plane. The headlines arrived like a wave, fast, loud, and impossible to ignore. But Mela didn't chase them. She didn't refresh the news. She didn't scroll through hashtags. Her phone lit up almost constantly that first week. Messages from friends, mentions from strangers, clips being reshared and quoted, voices yelling into podcasts, morning panels debating race, motherhood, and the culture of flying. Every ping brought another opinion, another demand for her to speak up. But Mela stayed quiet. Renee Hallbrook's termination was made public 6 days after the flight. It came with an official statement from Aurelia Skies. Effective immediately, Her employment was concluded. A full internal investigation had confirmed multiple violations of both protocol and conduct. The company announced a comprehensive review of training policies, including mandatory education on racial sensitivity and customer relations. They called it a cultural reset. Mela read the statement once. That was enough. A few days later, her sister sent a screenshot of Renee's social media, now private, where the former flight attendant claimed she had been set up and misunderstood, insisting she'd been dealing with an agitated and aggressive passenger. She's still trying to spin it, her sister had texted. Unreal. Mela didn't reply. What was there to say? The world had seen what happened, heard the tone, watched the silence. That was more powerful than any post. Then came the letter. Not from Elias. Not even from someone within his department, but from a chair of Aurelia Sky's board of directors, an older woman whose name Mela recognized from an old Forbes article. The letter was handwritten, in dark ink on heavy cream paper. It didn't open with formality. It opened with regret. It acknowledged failure, without excuses. It apologized not only for the flight, but for the culture that allowed it to happen. It didn't come with a check. Instead, it came with an offer, full funding for a new training initiative focused not on optics, but empathy. A space for Mela, if she wished, to lend her voice, not as a victim, but as a guide. She folded the letter neatly and placed it in the drawer with her son's hospital bracelet. She didn't take their money. She didn't want a speaking role. She wanted them to learn. 2 weeks passed before she agreed to speak publicly. Just once. Not to CNN. Not to national radio. She said yes to a small local paper, Liberty Echo Media. The request came from a young journalist named Justine Harper. Her email wasn't polished. It was personal. Justine wrote that she was raised by a single mother, that she was half black, half Filipina, and had never seen someone like Mela in a headline who hadn't been flattened into a stereotype or reduced to a sob story. She didn't want to cover her. She wanted to listen. Mela agreed. They met in a quiet cafe in the historic part of Atlanta. No crew. No boom mics. Just a notebook, a recorder, and 2 cups of tea. You had every reason to yell, Justine said, her voice gentle. Why didn't you? Mela stirred her cup, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. Then she smiled. A real one. Tired but rooted. Because I'm not here to prove my anger, she said. I'm here to protect my son. Justine didn't speak. She just nodded and let the moment hang. Sometimes, silence is how truth lands hardest. Mela didn't ask to be a symbol. She didn't want to become a trending topic or the face of a crisis. What she wanted, what she still wanted, was peace. And that's why, weeks later, she found herself walking beneath the soft shade of Bellevue Park, pushing her son's stroller beneath a sky that finally remembered how to be blue. It was one of those rare Atlanta afternoons where the sunlight wasn't harsh, it just warmed. The trees rustled gently, kids shouted in the distance, and somewhere a saxophone played from someone's porch speaker. She moved slowly, no hurry in her step, the baby sleeping soundly beneath a light muslin blanket. His breaths were even, his tiny hands curled. The chaos was gone. As she rounded the bend near the rose garden, a woman walking a small dog slowed beside her. She was older, white, with soft features and tired eyes that looked like they had seen too much and forgotten too little. She looked at Mela, paused, and said with a voice quiet but deliberate, "You didn't raise your voice, but we all heard you." Mela blinked. It was such a simple thing to say, and yet it held everything. She smiled. "Thank you," she said, the words settling somewhere deep. The woman nodded and walked on, the dog trotting beside her. Mela stood still for a moment, watching the wind move through the trees. She thought about the fear she carried on that plane, the restraint, the memories of her mother, the shaking in her bones, the heat of injustice, and how, in the end, she hadn't broken. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't folded. And Mela smiled, not because she won, but because she didn't lose herself. Sometimes, the most powerful response isn't loud, it's steady. Mela didn't need to shout to be heard. She stood her ground with dignity, and the world around her had no choice but to listen. So, what does it mean to stand up for yourself without standing in anger? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more real, powerful stories that stay with you long after the credits roll.